I grew up in a home where we were well taken care of. We always ate good, nutritious food, always had decent clothes to wear. We never went home hungry, went to bed hungry. You might say we were rich, and we were, at least compared to the vast majority of people who live in this world. But I never felt rich. In fact, I often felt the very opposite. I often felt as if there was not enough, especially when it came to money. Or maybe enough to cover what I needed, but not for everything that I wanted. Money was something that I always felt was scarce, whether it was or not. Now, it probably had something to do with growing up with 4 siblings and 1 income for the family, and yes, things sometimes did have to be stretched a little thin. I also probably picked up somewhat on the attitude of my parents, who came of age in those years immediately following the Great Depression, when scarcity was a very real and present reality. But for whatever reason, wherever it came from, I grew up with this attitude towards money and towards spending, which made me almost fear to spend. Now, when I did come of age and finally went out to work in the world and finally earned some money of my own, I did feel a certain amount of euphoria. Now I've earned my own money, I can spend it on whatever I want. And yes, I even went out and I made a few frivolous purchases. And no, I'm not going to tell you what I bought. And no, it wasn't a leisure suit. But it didn't last long. The euphoria didn't last. There was this deep feeling inside me that I couldn't just be free to spend money. And I still carry that attitude with me to this very day, this real hesitation to feel free, to feel open, to just spend on whatever I want, no matter how much I may have. I carry that with me. And I'm not telling you this today to complain or say that there's something really wrong with me. I don't think I've suffered over much by having this kind of attitude. Certainly hasn't hurt me to be somewhat frugal in my spending at all. I'm just telling you, as a way to indicate to you that yes, I got certain hang-ups when it comes to money. Because I suspect that you do too. I suspect that we all do. Because you see, in this world where we live, where we find ourselves today, it is entirely possible to be an atheist or an agnostic as regards God. You have the luxury of going through this life and not worrying yourself over whether God exists or whether God has any impact on your life. You can do that. But you cannot be an agnostic when it comes to money. Money has power, has influence on your life, and you cannot escape it. It has power over your life. And for that reason, we all carry with us certain attitudes towards money. And its goodness or its evilness, its scarcity or its abundance, its uses and its abuses. We cannot escape these attitudes, for good or for ill. Jesus actually had a whole lot to say about money. Talked about it all the time, more often than he talked about a whole lot of other things. Which is really kind of amazing when you think about it, because Jesus didn't have any. I mean, he had none at all. One day, he wanted to make a point using a coin as an illustration, and he had to borrow it. He didn't even have one coin to make a point with. But despite having no money, or perhaps because of it, Jesus had some very important things to say about money, and a very different point of view on it. For example, how many of you have caught yourself saying to yourself, if only? If only I had more money, everything would be all right. If only I had more money, I wouldn't have to worry. I know I catch myself saying that to myself all the time. It's pretty hard, actually, in this world, so dominated by money and its power, to avoid falling into thinking that money is the solution to everything. It's not, It's a lie. Money doesn't eliminate worry. And you just have to look around at the world to see that. Poor people don't worry more than rich people. If anything, it's probably the other way around. Rich people worry more, because the more you have, the more you have to lose. That's what Jesus was talking about. So Jesus, as someone who had no money, could look people in the eye and say, you don't need to worry. And the reason why he could do that was because he didn't have money. He even pointed to things like flowers and birds, things that also had no money and yet seemed to do fine. He said, look at these things. You don't need to worry. They don't, because they don't have anything. So basically, Jesus' prescription to stop worrying was this: give away everything you have. All your money, all your possessions, then you'll be dependent on God. God will take care of you, and you won't have to worry. That was Jesus' prescription for eliminating worry from your life. And Jesus knew what he was talking about because he didn't have any money. But despite the fact that this is actually pretty good advice, and despite the fact that Jesus knew what he was talking about, I rather suspect that none of you are ready to try it, are you? None of you are ready today to give away everything you have and see if that means you worry less. But even if you're not going to go that far, at least you can give up on this one idea: that more money equals less worry, that more money equals the solution to all your problems. It's a lie. It is not true. I've long loved that passage that we read this morning from the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus talks about eliminating worry and anxiety from your life. I preached on it many times, but I finally realized this time when I opened it up and looked at it, that all these years, throughout my entire ministry, I have actually been reading this passage wrong. Because every time I open up that passage and read it, I start reading where it says, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life. Treat the whole thing as a separate little passage. Can you see the problem with that? It's the first word. Therefore. When somebody comes up to you and says something to you in a sentence that starts with the word therefore, that's always a signal, isn't it? For example, therefore I don't eat gluten anymore. Or, therefore I don't ride on roller coasters anymore. If you overheard someone saying either of those two phrases, you would rightly be concerned to know what came before that, right? Oh, what happened last time you ate gluten? Or what did you hear about roller coasters before I get in line? The word therefore always has to make you look back and see what was said before. And yet, with this verse, when it comes to this verse that begins with the word therefore, we just start reading and look forward. What I'm saying is this: when Jesus told people not to worry, part of the reason was because of the birds and the flowers. But there was another reason. a better reason, the therefore reason. Because just before Jesus said, therefore, according to the Gospel of Matthew, he says this: no one can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. Basically what Jesus is saying here is this: if you have worry, if you have anxiety, your problem is not your anxiety. Your problem, Jesus is saying, is that you are a slave. And the interesting part is what he's saying that you are a slave to, because he sums it up by saying this: you cannot serve God and wealth. Except, that's not exactly what he says. What it actually says right there in the Gospel of Matthew, and the same thing you can also find in the Gospel of Luke, is this. What Jesus actually says is you cannot serve God and mammon. And there's a problem with that, because you see, the Gospels were written in Greek. And mammon is not a Greek word. As a matter of fact, no one's quite sure what language mammon is in. Might be Hebrew, might be Syriac, might be Aramaic. All of those languages, which are related, have a word that sounds kind of like mammon, that means riches or wealth. The best guess, of course, is that it's probably an Aramaic word, because Aramaic, as far as we can tell, was the actual language that Jesus spoke. So what we have here is an Aramaic word just cropping up in the middle of this passage. And think for a moment what that means. As I said, as far as we can tell, Jesus probably spoke Aramaic, and yet the early church traditions, the gospel writers who followed them, translated everything that Jesus said into Greek. That means that when we're reading the words of Jesus, we don't have his actual words, just translations. But there are a few exceptions, a few places in the Gospels where the Gospel writers do not translate, but leave Jesus' words in the actual Aramaic. So, for example, some of the words that Jesus says when he healed people, they appear in Aramaic. The words that Jesus spoke from the cross are remembered in Aramaic. Another key one, the word Abba, the Aramaic word for father. Jesus probably said that one a lot, and people remembered it in the original language. So in all of those cases, you can maybe understand why they remembered the actual words in Aramaic and passed them down in the church. Those were pretty important words. But why this one? Why in this verse is this one word in the actual language that Jesus spoke passed down to us? The church must have remembered this particular word because it had special significance to them. Because they understood what Jesus was doing in this saying. They understood that what Jesus was doing was setting up an opposition between God on the one hand and mammon on the other. And that basically what Jesus was saying was that there were two gods, God and mammon, and you had to choose which one you were going to serve. Jesus was saying that wealth, that riches are a god in this world. And he was right. And he is still right. God to this very day, riches and wealth to this day remain deities of our world, with all the trappings of deity. Money has its temples. It has its high priests. It has its prophets. We just call the temples banks, and we call the priests brokers, and we call the prophets economists. Money has enormous influence and power in this world. It has an orthodoxy. If you are a politician and you do not agree with the orthodox teachings of economies, you will not be elected, or if you are elected, you will fail. Money is that powerful. Money is an omniscient, omnipresent God in our society. Now, it's true that a lot of the power of money in this world is an illusion, a religious fable, if you will. You know, it turns out that throwing darts at a dartboard is at least as good a method for choosing stocks as consulting the best brokers. The predictions of the prophets of money, the economists, often come to nothing, and they fail again and again. Their promises are empty. And when we do give all of our devotion to money, when we pass over to money all the control of our economy, when we unfetter the marketplace completely, putting our faith in money, it often lets us down. Really badly, in fact. As you may recall, pretty much happened in 2008. In many ways, money is a false god, but a powerful one nonetheless because of the lies that we believe. And what Jesus was saying is this: yes, mammon is a god in our world, but a false god, and one you need not serve. You have a choice. But it's an active choice you need to make. You must choose. Not merely to not serve money, you must choose to serve another. That is your only option, your only escape. There's a passage, we read it this morning in 1 Timothy, that is, as far as I can tell, the most frequently misquoted passage in the entire Bible. Because most people, when they quote it, remember it like this: for money, they say, is the root of all evil. It's not what it says. And it's not true. Money isn't evil. Money's just a tool. And like any tool, it can be used for good and it can be used for evil. Money's also inescapable. You can't go through life in this world, in this modern society, without dealing with money and its claims over you. It is inescapable. But it's not in itself evil. What the passage actually says, of course, is this: for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. So the problem comes not from money itself, but from our devotion to it. When we devote ourselves to it, when we agree to serve it, we give it power, we make it into a god. And it will dominate our lives, and it will create worry, and it will create endless trouble. Jesus is saying that we have a choice. You don't have to serve God, the God of money. But you must choose, and you must choose actively to serve another. It's your only way out. I mean, just to ignore the demands of money in this world, just to not agree to follow it, will simply consign you to endless debt. But you can't escape it by choosing to serve another. And think of the freedom. The freedom that God calls us to embrace. Not to be limited, not to be controlled by money and its abundance or its lack, but to serve another is what we are called to do. Please take a few moments in silence.